Deputy Kirsten Morel, Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Deputy Miles Scott, Assistant Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Councillor Bendijo, Assistant Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Dan Hasco, Group Director of Economy.
And Richard Corrigan, Chief Officer for the Economy.
Well done, you passed the first test.
Thank you. It's really helpful because it's written in front of us.
Yeah. That's why I keep my name in front, so just remember who I am. Well, welcome, Sister, and we had Dan in earlier today on a specific review that we're looking at. This is a general quarterly hearing, so we're going to try and get through a number of subjects today. The first of which is really to do with sport. Minister, we're mindful that you didn't have much of a say in the last quarterly hearing. We apologise for that, but your time has perhaps come today. As Deputy Andrews has said, you're on the starting lineup this time, not on the bench anymore. Can we ask for an update on the review for the funding of sport and the physical activity and how this will impact on the delivery programmes from 2025?
Yeah, so we are working with both HCS and SIPES and looking at what areas that we currently cover under sport heading that are more appropriate to their portfolios. I've commissioned a piece of work this summer to see actually how much do we support sport by. So we give Jersey Sport just over £2 million, I think it's £2.14 million. But infrastructure has costs of around £4.6 million, which can be attributed to sport. And so I've asked for a piece of work to be done to understand what we currently invest in sport. And clearly, one of our main investments is in infrastructure, sport in sports centres, etc., swimming pools in particular, which are very expensive to construct, but very expensive to run. And we need to understand the cost of that and the value that we're providing to Islanders.
Where would you say the headline areas of expenditure are in the sports portfolio?
Well, currently, in facilities would be where we invest most of our money, and running those facilities, 4.6 against 2.1, is quite clear. And then within sport itself, Jersey Sport, probably around 60% is actually spent on sport. What I would describe as sport. We do toddler play, we do holiday play clubs, we do move more, all things that are important. But in terms of sport and helping sports, men and women, there's around 60% of the money goes to sports.
When you talked about SIPE, so education in other words, what's the relevance of education in the overall portfolio of sporting facilities and sports provision?
Well, that's a great question, isn't it? So we currently provide the money from Sustainable Economic Development for things like toddler play, and we commission the work. We're not experts in that area, the SIPES portfolio is. And I think the other key area that we're working with SIPES on is around the facilities. So we've got so many facilities around the island which are totally underutilised. And I think before we go investing in more facilities, in some cases we do need more, we need to make sure that we're sweating that asset and they're available to the community throughout the year, not just term time or not just during school holidays. And so I'm having some constructive dialogue with the Education Minister. It's important from a community aspect that we can get these facilities working harder for the island.
So maybe that leads on to the second question, which we've got about sports facilities in the east of the island. Could you talk to us about any plans for either new or developed facilities in the east?
Well, I think in the first case, should pay tribute to the team at the FB Fields who've worked tirelessly following Storm Kieran, and to get that up and running is terrific. We've invested significantly there at the FB Fields to make sure that's proper. In terms of the east, we're just about to start, hopefully in about 3 or 4 weeks' time, at Oakfield. So that's over an £8 million investment, a 3-court facility, but we'll also host martial arts. It'll be a great venue for netball, for example. Cricket will be played there, basketball. We're looking at La Rockia School and the potential to provide a 3G pitch which would be utilised by the school during the school day, but would have separate change of facilities, separate access, so it could be accessed throughout the year and actually work for the community as a whole. We're very mindful of the lack of gym space, so we're trying to get the gymnasium that's at Oakfield open for the public, because I think there's capacity there, and notwithstanding the safeguarding challenges we may have during the school day, once the school day is finished, we should be utilising that asset for our active members. Another exciting project we're working on is launching a junior active, a gym membership for youngsters at Langford. So I'm really quite excited by that prospect, where youngsters who finish school in that area will be able to access the gym. Yeah.
And so on the active question, or rather to ask a question about active, is it profitable?
Great question, and that's why I've asked for this piece of work to be done, because do you include depreciation in your costs? In terms of staff costs, how much of your staff costs are attributed to the active program versus general management? So I couldn't tell you the answer. I would suggest it's probably not profitable at the moment.
But it does.
It's a very important part.
Do you get income though from it?
Yeah, we do generate significant income, but I'm not sure how much of our income that we generate for it goes against the costs that are attributed to those.
Are you comfortable philosophically with government running a sports facility and having that provision?
Should it be part of our core business? I think that's questionable, personally. We're doing a lot of work with Jersey Sport. We've got a new chief executive going into Jersey Sport in the next week or so. We're very excited by that appointment. And I think once Jersey Sport becomes more mature, my words, then perhaps we could look at them potentially to run some of our facilities. But that's not a discussion I've had with officers. It's just a personal view.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm going to just pass over to Deputy Wilson.
Okay, thank you. It's encouraging to hear the developments in St Clement in my parish. If I can make that statement and might want to come and talk to you more about that.
Well, I think what we've tried to do is to be realistic. There were some fantastic ideas and suggestions for the Rockhill School, which I just don't know how people thought they were going to be paid for. And I think what we need to do is to be realistic in what we can provide. There's a massive catchment area, as you know, in that part of the island, and I think we need to try and get on and deliver, and that's what I've tasked the team to do, is what can we realistically achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, Minister, could you tell us what work's been undertaken to understand the relationship between sports strategy and the wider health strategy? Have you got any joint indicators that you're working on in terms of trying to develop common purpose around each of those strategic frameworks? And how are you going to monitor this, and particularly in relation to the impact it's going to have on the community?
Yeah, so what we have done is set up a ministerial group which covers both health and youngsters, so SIPES. We are working on in that area. I think the point about opening schools for longer periods, or the facilities that are based at schools, is hopefully going to generate more participation. Particularly in some areas where we don't see large participation. I think there's potential for people to do sport, and that could be just bouncing a ball and throwing a ball through a hoop in their local school playground. And so I think there's lots of opportunity for us to do more. I think encouraging people to exercise is vital. I see that as a public health initiative rather than a sport initiative, although clearly if we've got the facilities, we're happy to facilitate that. Mm-hmm. So we are working on the strategy jointly. Yeah.
Would you consider developing some joint health outcomes for some of those pieces of work that you've just outlined, that we can see and track progress? I think we all see the benefit of prevention, and that's both prevention of illnesses, but equally if people have had an episode, the rehabilitation of people. And we do a lot of work at Springfield with the health team for cardio work, in particular breathing
And I think we could do more of that in the community. Yeah.
Would you target any particular group around that?
I think it's too early for me to say if we would or we wouldn't. I think by setting up this working group together, we are looking at what are the options that we've got. And certainly the health minister is very keen on prevention and supporting the public health body. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of the work that you've done to improve accessibility and inclusivity in sports, can you just give us some information about what progress has been made around that?
Well, I probably don't think we've made enough progress as we should. It's really important. I've learned a lot about this. I spoke to a coach recently, and I really didn't understand the difference between girls' sport and boys' sport. And this lady who'd played their sport at national level explained the differences, which when she told me, I fully understood the message. But prior to that, I'd just seen football as football. And clearly, people have got different needs and at different ages. And it really hit home at me. I was delighted to attend the Jersey Sport breakfast on Women's Day earlier this year. And there's some terrific work being done there. A lot of collaboration between clubs in the same sport. Golf is a great example where they were recognised nationally. If I think of football and I think of changing rooms, we just don't think about girls' participation in football. A changing room is a changing room currently, and I think there's a much wider understanding. I think it's an area that Jersey Sport are doing well in making sports more widely available. We've seen a cricket event recently hosted by Jersey Cricket for women one evening, so more of a social thing, but to try and encourage girls to play cricket. The work we're doing around the new gymnastics facility at Oakfield, a lot of work is getting done there with the Special Gymnastics Club, for example, to make sure that we've got hoists and lifts for people who need support. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just in terms of the way in which you want to see that progressed, what would you want to see in the next 12 months in terms of improvements?
Well, certainly you can measure, the amount of people that participate. There's very low female participation in some sports. I was talking to the rock climbing community this week, and they say they have about 50-50 split, which is fantastic. I've been to watch the Jersey women's rugby team play at St. Peter's, and they're doing really well. They've got a good programme with their youth. I know that at the end of August, the JFA have got an international women's tournament they're hosting here. We've already spoken to somebody about holding a football tournament in Jersey, but focusing on girls. And Jersey Bulls this week have announced the launch of their foundation, and again they're focusing on women's sport as well.
Why do you think it's been so difficult to get that profile and that engagement?
I don't know. In a previous life, I introduced ladies football to St John's Football Club when I was the president, probably 20 years ago. And I dare say a lot of it's down to volunteers. That's often the case with sport, is getting volunteers. And there's a lot of work done, not only for people to participate in sport, but we need to work harder on training our officials and our judges and our referees, because we need to find pathways for them. And a great example of that is someone who's recently retired from the volleyball, who was involved in the Paralympics. And so has gone right to the top in their sport as an official. And I know that person's helped local sports, so I worked with him in the 2015 Island Games. And we've just got to encourage people and try and find out what the barriers are and try and find solutions. Yeah.
And just for the benefit of the public, can you just remind us, is this anywhere to be seen in the sports strategy in terms of this focus on women at all?
Well, I couldn't point you to a paragraph, but rest assured that both government and Jersey Sport are very mindful of the need to increase participation across the demographics, across communities, and across abilities. So we're very keen to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. There's just one final question I'd like to ask, which was about the kinds of initiatives that are about to ensure that those who are unrepresented in particular sports receive the appropriate funding to enable them to engage and participate. Can you just give us some information about that?
Well, I think people can get funding from a whole range of areas. So Jersey Sport manage some of our funding. The Community Foundation also support people. Another good thing that Jersey Sport do is help groups to put packs together to try and get sponsorship and support. So I think there's a number of areas where we are working on that. And,
Are there any that come to mind specifically in terms of what you're trying to target at all?
Well, the challenge we have is getting access to cash that we can put into that. So, if we can increase our spend on sport, then clearly that's an area we would be keen to do. I think the big screen at Howe Davis Park, it's really interesting to see some of our community, the numbers that we're getting to the games. We're seeing some of our communities well represented at that event. So I think that's one way, because it's free to enter. I think it's a great way of bringing communities together. And last year I went to watch a football match, and it was phenomenal. The involvement of the families of this community that were playing in it was just fantastic. It was like going back 30 years. It was really good. Yeah.
Do you have any sense of what percentage of people with a disability are engaged in sport in the island at all?
I don't, but what I do know is that the Jersey Sports Association for the Disabled do some terrific work. I mentioned the gymnastics earlier, but they do swimming, they do football, they do an enormous amount of work, and Les Amis do a lot of work themselves. They recently had a tournament. Unfortunately, I was away, so I couldn't go and watch it, but there's some terrific work getting done out there. We've got a very high-quality tennis player who's disabled, and so I think there's a lot riding for the disabled. I think they've just regenerated that charity, so that's a fantastic initiative, and I think they've got some new volunteers involved. So, when you see people connecting with horses, that's absolutely terrific.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
I've got a question about, hopefully this might make sense to you, about consolidation of sports clubs. Does that mean anything to you? I can clarify what I mean.
Yeah.
I've had it put to me by people in some sports sectors that there can be lots of little small clubs that so there's some duplication. And from I suppose a ministerial point of view, when you're dealing with maybe new initiatives or funding requests, is that problematic sometimes?
I don't think so. I think sports clubs, and I've been involved with sports clubs for decades. They're probably more political than politics at times. So sports clubs get created for a whole range of reasons. It could be to provide something for people with different needs, or it could be somebody wants to become more elite than others. The challenge we've got around facilities is the limited space we have on the island, the limited budget we have on the island. And one thing that I'm desperately trying to do is when people that lease property from the government, that they all pay the same amount of money. And that work I've gotten done in the summer is to identify. I had 3 clubs playing the same sport. 2 clubs paid X and 1 club paid 2 times X. And that's just, it's not acceptable in my book. That'll take time as leases come to an end to try and get people on a level footing. I think there are opportunities to use sports facilities by more than one club, so we can sweat the asset. That doesn't mean consolidating clubs. It means really getting your facilities to work harder for you. So, I talk about my experience at St John. There's 28 different user groups at the recreation centre, and the rifle range is used for shooting, pistol shooting. It's used for kickboxing, trapeze yoga, archery, and they all use the same space, and it's terrific.
Okay, that's fine. I think you've answered that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Should we move on to a new topic?
Absolutely, yep.
Which is, let's draw one out of the hat, shall we? I think it's going to be cannabis.
I've been subbed already.
Yeah, being subbed off already. Being subbed off.
First half substitution is never good.
I mean, you can keep on answering these questions. It's just a different subject. Thank you, Deputy.
Yep, no, thank you very much, Chair. Minister, I'd like to firstly start by asking you, do you believe that Jersey's legislation is fit for purpose for the cannabis industry? And if not, what are you seeking to do to address that issue?
I think Jersey's legislation is fit for the work that we've been, or the cannabis industry has been doing, and principally that was about getting the cannabis industry, started, up and running. And we are in a position now where at least one of the companies is selling its products and it's exporting its products internationally. So it's absolutely been fit for that. But we do recognise that we're at a stage now where we need to review the regulations and look to how we can use those regulations to embed the industry and make sure that the industry can go from the kind of start-up phase into the future ongoing, hopefully, obviously successful phase. And that's a review that we're undertaking at the moment, and we're doing so obviously in conjunction with the Health Minister, who is ultimately the regulator. So yes, there's no question they are fit for purpose. The purpose that they were fit for was the start-up phase, and we review those regulations with a view to kind of rounding them out to make sure we can have ongoing success in the industry.
Because obviously this has been ongoing for some time. The incumbent Chief Minister, when he was the Sustainable Development Minister in your position, predicated that the cannabis industry has the potential to thrive and to potentially complement the financial service sector. So why do you believe that maybe the sector hasn't really been able to thrive as some people had hoped? And do you believe there are potentially barriers that exist that need to be broken down?
Yeah, I mean, I take issue with you saying, why do I believe that it's not thriving? I never said that. I've never said that. So that's not something I believe at all. As I said, I think we're moving from different phases, from start-up to kind of embedding and moving forward. The industry, I think it would be fair to say that as a brand new industry to the island, I think there have been more challenges and often different challenges than were initially expected when my predecessor set off down this road. But what we've seen is that those challenges can be absolutely overcome, and actually give us the opportunity to make sure that we've got a regulatory regime which can really kind of turbocharge the industry as we go forward. We still have huge interest in the sector, and really interestingly as well, I think the medicinal cannabis sector seems to have played a role as a catalyst for other areas of medtech sector to look at Jersey and start to see the island as a place that they can do business in. And so we're seeing other businesses in very different areas of the medical technology sector now moving to the island as well. And that's a huge benefit which perhaps wasn't foreseen when the medicinal cannabis sector was started. So it's a case that you learn as you go. I think with anything, I mean, we're likely to talk about the Opera House, and one thing I've said about the Opera House is, you can look behind a plasterboard wall and you'll find a whole load of things, a whole load of challenges you weren't expecting to find, and that's the same with any start-up business, and it's the same with any start-up industry as well. There have been challenges, not all of them foreseeable, but we're overcoming, or the industry's overcoming them, and we help them to do that. Sorry, yeah.
I was just going to say, building a facility that's operating at a global standard from scratch is quite an undertaking. The first licence to do so was issued in December 2020. So considering that it's only 2024, I think the industry's come a hell of a long way. And it continues through subsequent rounds of fundraising to generate investment. And we are now in a situation where we are actually supplying products to Australia, UK, Germany. And with predictions of profitability in the sector coming through in Q4 of this year. So all the signs are that we're moving in the right direction.
When you say fundraising, you mean that the private sector is raising capital from investment?
A bit like all startups, cash flows, quite a difficult piece at the beginning. So there's sort of a race to reach regulatory standards before you can get into revenue. And I think that journey's been longer than many anticipated. But nevertheless, if you look at, moving from nothing, no infrastructure to where we are today with some of the companies, most of which are now well into producing at least for accreditation and some beyond that, I think the industry's moved a long way and generated, significant inward investment along the way.
Minister, I know I've engaged with one local firm, and the process seemed to be quite bureaucratic in order for them to have their licence in order to then sell cannabis. So would you be in agreement that the process potentially could be easier for new entrants to increase the number of firms in the cannabis sector, or do you believe the current arrangements that are in place are fit for purpose and they don't need to be changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not a critique that I've had expressed myself by the firms in the island. I'm always willing to look at regulation. Like, as we say, we are looking at the review of that regulation. One area, and it's perhaps what the people you were speaking to may have been referring to, is at the moment we have annual licences. And so one area we're looking at is, can we extend the period of time for the licence? Because, again, I think I referred to this in our previous hearing, certainty is really important in business. And if you're uncertain as to whether at the end of the year you'll be allowed to carry on, that makes it hard to make investment, and it makes it hard to find capital investment into your business as well. So that's one area we're looking at, is the extension of the licence period. I'd be, please do ask the people you're talking to if they do have concerns beyond that area. Please do bring them to us, and we're happy to look at it. I think it is also very important, though, to state that the regulation around this area has to be very, strict and tight, because it is a controlled substance that's being grown, an internationally controlled substance that's being grown. So, there definitely has to be a balance struck between ease of process and making sure that the regulations and the processes around those regulations are tight, ensure security, ensure health security, and also ensure that the UK, which is ultimately, in a sense, the sponsor of this from a regulatory perspective, that they are happy with the regulation that we have. This is not all within our control. We have the UK kind of sitting above us, and if the UK is unhappy with our regulation, then we have to work with them to change that. So it's definitely, as opposed to some of the other areas of regulation, licensing laws, things like that we're talking about, or entertainment, public entertainment law, this is one where we have to be very aware of the international profile of cannabis as a controlled substance.
Feedback from those that have got licences is that it's reassuringly robust.
How happy are you with the UK holding that power over us for cannabis?
I don't see it as happy or unhappy. It's a fact. Jersey isn't a sovereign nation. We're not subscriber is the wrong word, but we're not part of the United Nations. We're not a member of the United Nations in our own right. Therefore, we are not allowed to operate these regulations in our own right. We have to do it under a kind of a sovereign nation's sponsorship, and that's the UK. So do you think until Jersey is wholly independent, there is no other choice.
Can we rely on the UK to be even-handed with Jersey? Do you think in this, what we've seen up until now, is that, have they always played fair with Jersey in this regard?
I believe so. It's not been brought to my... I genuinely look at Dan here, as you've been there from the beginning, but I've not heard any suggestion.
The way I would look at it is they have to be our parent regulator. We're a sub-agency of the UK because we can't be a signatory to a UN convention, the 61 convention. I look at it much more positively, which is that as our regulatory regime matures around this space, we've got effectively a very experienced regulator helping us and providing effectively consultancy advice as our regulations mature. I think that's very positive.
So when I just said about not being aware of kind of being even-handed or not even-handed, I was thinking specifically of the medicinal cannabis sector as opposed to the CBD sector, in case that's an example.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about the CBD issues with, which had traces of THC, which were then prevented from operating.
No, I think that was a really unfortunate side. And from my perspective, I think it's a real shame, because I think the company that suffered there was a brilliant company in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship in the island. I wasn't privy to all the technical reasons why this happened, so I can't say that they weren't even-handed or not, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I hope the UK learn them.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I've just got one more question, and this is just in relation to the legalisation of cannabis. as a legislator, obviously, when we make decisions, and let's say if it's primary legislation, it have to be approved through the Privy Council. So as a minister, do you have any concerns about the legalisation of cannabis and our relationship from a constitutional perspective with the UK?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. I personally don't. I believe that's an area where if within our own 9x5 land mass we choose to legalise something, then I think that's up to us. I appreciate that constitutionally it might not be wholly up to us, and that's perhaps where I'm less happy, if you know what I mean, because I think if we decide to allow something in this island because the State Assembly decides to allow it, whatever that may be, I think we should be able to do so.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe just declare my conflict of interest, given that Dan has made a number of references to the work around the regulations, and to say that I previously was involved in working with officers on this, and that's just so the public knows.
Thank you for working with officers.
But one of the things that I'd like to just work through is how are you actually developing the competitive stance around the medicinal cannabis industry in Jersey? I mean, the market has been, quite well developed in the island in terms of the development of the industry. But what are you going to do next in terms of maintaining that competitiveness? And in addition to that, do you have any particular challenges that you've anticipated around developing the competition in the market? And do you think that there will be a point where the production or the development of that industry will reach a threshold where it will no longer become competitive? Sorry,
there's a lot there. So as far as kind of where we're going now, this kind of regulatory review and policy review as well, in that sense, we're going to come out with stated policy on these issues, is very much around making Jersey competitive and making sure that the island is competitive. And part of that is around having the strength of regulations that enable Jersey to become a standard bearer for quality medicinal cannabis around the world. It's been made, members of the public as well as the industry itself has said that is something that they believe will work very well. So we're kind of developing a Jersey standard for medicinal cannabis, and that's something which could then, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of nascent medical technology sector, that's something that could then potentially work into that wider medical technology sector as well. So I think it is really important from a competitive perspective that we do undertake this regulatory review to put Jersey up there at the very top. Other steps that have already taken place as well, I was really pleased that the industry itself have come together with a kind of Jersey Cannabis Advisory Board, so that it's not a government board. We did play a role in convening the people, essentially asking them. I think we think it'd be a good idea for you to do this, but it's entirely independent. But that's a really good way for the industry itself to work together to enhance the industry and to make sure that it is as competitive as it can possibly be. And they have recently appointed a UK barrister as chair of that board as well, which I think is a really good step forward, having an independent chair, but clearly with excellent legal knowledge. So there's a number of things taking place, but I think that Jersey standard is a really key part of that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry, just on that, in terms of the board structure itself, it's funded by the industry itself. There's no government investment in that at all. That's independent.
That's
Totally
entirely
independent. And we don't always go to the meetings, even if we're invited. So it's effectively a producer group.
Yeah. And just the other issue around competition, is the competition mainly internal competition between the established industry in the island, or is there any other external competition that's starting to appear?
No, the competition I'm referring to is principally external. I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I think what we're seeing in Jersey, particularly with the creation of this cannabis kind of producer group, is greater level of collaboration within the island, and I think that plays really well, given obviously to some extent there is a lack of scale in Jersey. Ultimately, the industry so far has been very focused on developing or growing, producing cannabis flower, which in essence to some extent is a commodity product. It's the lowest end of the value chain. Where the industry can really go and where we would like to help them through regulatory review, etc., is move into the ability to do the value-added part of that chain. And so that's kind of finished cannabis products, not just the flower, which is then being processed into cannabis products elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that is likely to need a collaborative approach within the industry to do that properly. So I think we're going to see a greater level of collaboration as opposed to competition within the island. All of that designed to make sure that we are incredibly competitive externally.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question? Because something came up in the debate, was it last week or 2 weeks ago now? About
The last sitting.
the last sitting, indeed. That the distinction between medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis is perhaps a social or legal one. It's not a horticultural one.
Yes.
So what's being produced in Jersey at the moment for medicinal export could that also be done for recreational export currently if there are countries which have legalised cannabis? Is there anything stopping the medicinal cannabis that's being produced being used recreationally in other jurisdictions?
I don't believe there is, but I will pass
So
to Dan.
if you look at places like California, they're synonymous products, in effect.
Yeah.
They're the same thing.
It's important to be aware of the regulations in those countries themselves, which is where I think when the Minister was mentioning the having the industries present in the island collaborate and agree what really needs to be done. I mean, bear in mind they may well have different target markets.
No, I get that. I'm just wondering in terms of openness and transparency. For example, if Jersey didn't have medicinal cannabis available and legalised, if we hadn't legislated for it, we could presumably still produce medicinal cannabis to export. So I'm wondering why we still call it medicinal cannabis and why we don't just call it cannabis.
It's a really interesting question. It's genuinely not one I've thought about myself. I don't think there's anything in the regulations which say that we will only export it as a medicinal product. That's why I looked to Dan there, just in case there's something. I don't think the regulations state in any way that it's a medicinal product that we have to produce.
There is a differentiation where medicinal implies a degree of psychoactive substance, THC, and other cannabis products might not have that. So CBD products, for example, wellness products, that sort of thing. So I think it's a useful differentiator. Cannabis arguably could be used to describe hemp as well.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
It's a controlled drug, but what I'm saying is a product which is medicinal could be used by someone who doesn't have a prescription in a country where it's completely legal to use it recreationally. So that's what.
No, I don't think, again, Dan, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Canada has legalised cannabis recreationally. I don't think there's anything at our end of the regulations which would stop us exporting to Canada for purely recreational, for the recreational side of the Canadian industry.
Is there a reputational concern around
that? Would be, sorry, I'll get to that in a sec. But as Deputy Scott quite rightly points out, we can only export when there is an import licence granted by the government of that country. So if Canada didn't want us to be exporting to them for recreational purposes, it would be on Canada to not issue an import licence.
Yeah.
Without the import licence, we can't issue an export licence. So it's very much kind of, and I apologise to Canada for using them as this example, but they're the one country I can think of that's legalised for recreational use completely. And so it's kind of more on the receiving country to decide whether they want to receive it.
plus there's a complication of routing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you keep an eye out around the not just the nomenclature, but also the technical labelling and the all of those considerations around the products that we're exporting? Is that something you're willing to keep an eye on, just in terms of whether or not currently things that we call medicinal cannabis are being sold for recreational, whether they could be, whether there's any benefit in doing that, what the risks are around that reputationally?
Really happy to look at it. You mentioned the reputational side. I think the reputational side is really important. A few minutes ago I talked about having a Jersey standard. The idea of that is within the medicinal cannabis sector, not within the recreational sector. And so if, it absolutely be incumbent on us if we wanted to make sure that Jersey is known as purely medicinal cannabis, then we would have to adjust our regulations at this end to make that.
And I guess what I'm asking is that maybe rather than, I'm sure these things will evolve anyway, but rather than saying we export medicinal cannabis, we could say we export X, Y, and Z type of strains which do X, Y, and Z in terms of their effect and their
We could, but of course, what is being exported in terms of strains will always be down to the private companies to decide, as opposed to, I mean, we could write it into legislation. I'd suggest that
I'm not saying we should.
Yeah, I'd suggest wouldn't be the appropriate way forward as the market changes.
Isn't it true to say that part of the regulations require the route to market to be absolutely clarified?
Yes.
So if you comply with the regulations, you understand your route to market.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think one of the points about medicines regulation is we are talking medicinal cannabis is a medicine or an ingredient in a medicine, and they are governed by global standards anyway. So things like manufacturing practice, packaging, labelling is all set out as a minimum standard based on effectively patient safety. So a recreational market might have different standards. There's nothing actually to stop a producer putting additional stuff on their packaging, but they do have a minimum standard around the description of what's in it and what it does. So that exists already. And actually we couldn't trade as an island without that. So that's a kind of safeguard in that respect.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. I think that was all I wanted to just ask, apart from the issues around the membership of the Jersey Cannabis Agency, the Jersey Cannabis Advisory Board and the Ministerial Oversight Group. And I'm very familiar with the configuration of all of those.
I was going to say, I'm not sure I have to answer that for you. Maybe
has
for the
there
rest
been
of the panel.
any more work done on that to just clarify the governance and the interface and the membership of what those respective
I mean, that is part of obviously the work of the previous scrutiny panel and their recommendations. On our side, we've worked through all those recommendations. I think there's still work to be done on the health minister's side with regard to that, but from the economy department side, I think we've worked through and kind of responded to all those recommendations. It's funny, in my head, there's quite clear domains. You know, ministerial oversight group is just that. It's a ministerial kind of policy oversight group. It includes myself and the health minister principally. From the Jersey Cannabis Advisory Board's perspective, that is solely a producer group. So nothing to do with the political side of it or the government side of it at all. And from the regulatory perspective, that is the health minister. Now that's definitely an area we're looking at. As Deputy, I'm sure you'll be aware, it is a large burden on one minister to be the regulator. Yeah. And so that's definitely something we are looking at as to how we should structure the regulatory function within government and whether it should all just fall on the minister's shoulders.
Okay, and has there been any further discussion as to whether it is the health minister or whether it is the environment minister who has the regulatory agenda or the regulation agenda? Has there been any more discussion about...
I missed the first minister that you said. I heard the environment minister.
So, as you pointed out very clearly, the responsibility to the health minister is there at this moment in time. But there was some discussion as to whether or not, because it's a regulatory function, whether there would be any transfer of responsibilities, knowing that the Medicines Act is the thing that's going to be the issue that will make that decision. But I also just wanted to know, has there been any progress on that? Have you found a way forward, or does anybody know if there is a way forward on that?
I've not been involved in conversations about moving that regulatory function, and I'll ask Dan whether...
No, so, I mean, that was a live conversation when you were minister.
Yeah.
I don't think that has moved forward, and, you know, in answer to the question around the structures, at the moment we don't have a sitting political oversight group. This is something we'll be discussing with the health minister on Tuesday next week to say, you know, ultimately, is there a need? I get the sense from Chief Minister, from the Minister for Health and Sustainable Economic Development Minister that if what we're trying to achieve with the sector is to support it, and I think at the moment that feels like where we still are. And what we're trying to do, I think, is a cross-government piece. So, effectively, you know, strengthening the cannabis framework and the legislative base, developing the value chain, so moving towards away from ingredients to finished product, which doubles the value, promoting the sector internationally, and looking at the sort of adjacent opportunities in the economy. All of that requires a lot of coordination. So it's an important point that we're going to be making to the Health Minister on Tuesday to say that we do need to make sure we've got the proper coordination and oversight to make all of that happen.
But that will protect the separation of powers around regulation and the industry.
Yeah. There's also that outstanding question around should we be expanding the remit and maybe even delegating some of the responsibilities of the health minister or the environment minister, to depoliticise the process to some extent. But I think those are still live discussions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All happy with that? Thank you. We'll move on to the next section, which is retail. So we're going to ask some questions around Sunday trading, perhaps around opening hours more generally, also around the idea of a French supermarket. So a lot of these themes you've spoken about, Minister, and they've been in the media relatively recently as well. Let's start off with Sunday trading. Are you envisaging relaxing further some Sunday trading rules, and if so, what might that entail?
It's not something that's been on my agenda, so no, in short.
Okay.
As always, I'm happy to listen to if people think that further changes need to be made. From my perspective, I know that in the last assembly, we voted through a big kind of deregulation, so to speak, or a big liberalisation of Sunday trading laws. So effectively, any shop can really trade on a Sunday now. What I think, again, my point of view, as a personal point of view, not a government point of view, is that I think, particularly in the town centre, we're still not seeing an enormous uptake of Sunday opening. I have concerns about how that impacts on our tourism sector and our visitor economy. So rather than changing further the regulations, my wish would be to encourage businesses to open on Sundays and to encourage more businesses in the town centre to open on Sundays, whilst appreciating that staffing is
What
perhaps
mechanism, what levers have you got? Do you think soft levers?
charm.
Okay. I won't comment on that. I was tempted to say we might wait a long time if we're solely reliant on that.
Strong arm is the next one.
Strong arm does rhyme as well. I'm just looking at your comments. So more shops open on Sundays would boost the visitor experience, which I think is what you've just really told us. Another area I think that ties in with that is around the opening hours as well.
Yeah.
So we were talking before we went live about the fact that Europeans maybe have a longer lunch period. Shops may be shut over a lunch period between 12 and 2, but they might be open later on in the evenings. As I understand, there's no reason that shops can't legally open late into the night. I don't know if there's an ultimate time that they can stay open till, but in terms of the general flexibility that might be offered to shoppers, is that also something you'd like to see?
I would, yes, particularly during your summer months, your visitor months, and also in December particularly. And obviously in December we do have later opening hours. I think parish restrictions can play a role in that as well. But I would, from my perspective, I would encourage any shop owner to seek to stay open as long as possible. But to say that is very easy. The constraints on the shop owners are pay, actually getting staff, the overheads. So, I've worked in retail in the past. There was that point, and we did in the summer. The shops that I worked in sometimes open till 6 or 6:30. They could at the time become kind of, you'd call it a graveyard shift, in the sense of after your 5 till 5:30 influx of customers out of the offices, it would suddenly die off. And so from a shop owner's perspective, they have to look at, is it worth paying their staff to stay open if only 2 or 3 customers come in? So whilst I would encourage all shop owners to seek to stay open as long as possible, because I think that's a better visitor economy experience, I say that knowing very well that they have huge constraints on them and they need to operate profitable businesses. So I don't say that in a glib fashion or in a critical fashion. It's just, the more they can be open, the better I think it is for towns.
I'm guessing what you're talking about, or one is talking about, is that a cultural shift would be needed, and it's chicken and egg. So if people don't shop in the evening because the shops aren't open, and therefore if you do open your shop, there's no culture of doing shopping after work. Whereas I must admit, I find it puzzling that how shops can be open between 10 and 12. I wouldn't personally go and buy a suit or a casserole dish at 10 or 12 in the morning, but I might want to do it at 7 o'clock at night if I'm still in town. But if the shops are not open, I can't. So Do you have any thoughts about how you might, I'm asking the question again, but
Yeah.
what could we do to maybe move to a more European model in terms of our retail offering?
Well, I think there are things we are doing genuinely through the economy department, and one of those, and this is a really good example of how the ecosystem, the retail ecosystem, is very much an ecosystem. Sorry, it's so we've been putting on events. I think one of the best events that we put on recently was the Asian Lunar New Year. You know, middle of February, it's the darkest, dullest months. You know, footfall in town is probably at its lowest ebb. But with the Lunar New Year festival, we saw on a Sunday afternoon in the middle of February, thousands of people in town able to go shopping. My disappointment when I was seeing that was seeing so many shops that were shut during that time. And I was kind of like, we're now, you know, here's an event, we've delivered footfall, you know, it's then incumbent on the shop owners to open their doors. But I think, you know, communications may have not been appropriate. I can imagine a kind of deluge of criticism as to why they wouldn't do that, which is fine. But one of the things we can do, and we are doing, is providing events, trying to do that throughout the year to drive footfall into town. And again, the hospitality sector, I think, plays a role in that as well. We're seeing more kind of eateries, you know, cafes, things like this in the centre of town. They will often open later. If they're open later as well, then there's going to be higher footfall in town later, which then means it's more reasonable for the shop owners to open later as well. So I think it's that interdependency between different areas of the visitor economy sector. We're trying to bring them all together to work together, to play off each other so that they all enhance each other, and ultimately
That there needs to be attention given to local communities in terms of alcohol licensing. I don't know why that's being grouped together as a question, if I'm honest, but I think there is a synergy there. Is that something that you're mindful of, balancing competing needs? I mean, if we go back to Sunday trading, what one school of thought is, why are we regulating what time shops can open at all? We're saying B&Q, for example, can open from 10 till 4. Why is it not? Why can't it open from 8 till 8 on a Sunday? You know.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, ultimately, that's political. That's utterly political, isn't it? I come from the more liberal area when it comes to opening hours. I do think if it's your shop and you do the maths to work out when you should be opening and when it's profitable for you to open, then whether it's from 9 till 5 or 12, you know, midday till 9 o'clock at night, I think that's for you to decide. But there are people who, you know, view tradition in some ways, and that's important, and you have to hear their voices and balance those voices as well. And also then there is also an element of policing and public safety as well that comes into it. But I think we are moving, and we have seen, again, if you go back to our childhoods, Jersey had very, very conservative opening hours on Sundays particularly, but also into the evenings. You know, we're now seeing, I think, you know, the market is opening longer. That's probably one of the most traditional areas of town, but we've now got evening opening in the markets. We've got Thursday afternoon kind of opening happening, and we are moving into a much more liberal opening hours environment. And I personally think that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. Deputy Wilson, would you carry on for the last two questions?
Yes, I've got.
Yeah, we have a change of voice might help.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of when you're talking about extending opening hours and whatever, obviously that will have implications for traders, as you've just alluded to. Do you plan to do anything that will actually support businesses to remain open? Are there any particular incentives that you are offering as a government to be able to support these extended opening times?
Other than our own kind of events, you know, and that kind of external animation of the town centre,
Yeah.
I don't believe so, no. Certainly in terms of financial support, that side of thing, no.
No, okay. And for those that do, what kind of support will be given to businesses who, for example, are having to pay additional wages and that sort of thing? Is what you're saying is that they're going to take that decision entirely on their own, or is there anything that government is doing to protect workers' rights around that, or, you know, paying conditions, those sorts of things?
I think workers' rights in Jersey are well protected. And there's certainly no move to weaken that in any way. Deputy Taddy will be very pleased to know. In fact, you'll all be pleased to know. You know, that's not an area we're looking at. Yeah. I don't think there's any work that needs to be done there. I mean, one of the things I love about working as Economic Development Minister is, you know, what we're trying to do is create an environment, but it's actually private sector businesses that deliver the services that we're trying to create the environment for. So it is very much their decisions. Sometimes they will need, I'm very aware of the Connotab sitting to my left, you know, the locality has to be with those traders. So, you know, each parish and each locality will have its own different views. I imagine in St. John, you know, it may be that if a shop wanted to open very late, the Connotab might realise that's not appropriate in St. John's Village, for instance. In the town centre, the Connotab here might feel that it is, you know, appropriate. What I have done, so there are rules around kind of hours, and what I have done is I did sign an exemption for one business in St. Helier, which is a new business run by a new entrepreneur, and they offer vending 24 hours a day, and the laws kind of stopped them opening easily. They had to get all sorts of licenses in order to be, and I signed an exemption which meant they didn't need those licenses. And I think that was a very good move, and I'm really pleased to see that business thriving. And it's also interesting, until I spoke to the owner, I hadn't thought about it. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the customers that he sees in that store are actually public sector employees, the police, the nurses, the ambulance staff, who previously had nowhere to go to get a snack at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so realise, you know, it was his decision. I created an environment to enable him to carry through his decision, and actually the benefits actually accrue to the public sector as well, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, sure. Do you think that there is some imminent danger to the way in which the high street will flourish if people are not prepared or not willing to take up some of this extended hours type of initiative?
I mean, yes, I don't think it's a sudden danger. If there is a danger, it would be over time. But, you know, I'm really pleased, I can say, is that we are seeing healthy footfall. We have installed 2 extra footfall cameras in town. They are reporting very healthy footfall in the centre of town, which is superb. And I know Deputy Andrews asked me questions about, you know, about some areas that I've commented on in town where there's vacancies. And I was really pleased, you know, I can tell you that we have at least 3 retailers talking to landlords about moving in to St Helier High Street, and that's because they're able to see the footfall numbers, and what they realise is that Jersey has a really healthy high street still. Although we're not back to pre-COVID levels, that's also about changes to working, you know, people with remote working, staying at home during the day and things like that. So we have a healthy high street. I think we're going through a period of transition where changes in the UK and kind of bankruptcies in the UK, etc., affect us directly. You know, if a UK firm that operates here goes bankrupt in the UK, we lose that firm too, even if their branch was successful locally. I think we're going through a transition period, but our vacancy rate is still significantly lower than the UK vacancy rate, although it's the highest it's been certainly since I have been in the States Assembly.
I think also, you know, the public realm is really important. So the experience that people have when they come to St Helier. You know, I'm fascinated to walk through town at lunchtimes and see the amount of people sitting and just relaxing, right through from Broad Street, the square, right up to the parade. And I think we've got to do more around that, and certainly working with the Constable of St Helier. It is about the experience that people have, and as we get more and more people living in St Helier, we've got to do more and more work around that experience.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Do you think that is in itself almost a stimulus to attract new interest, new investment? So you're almost getting some sort of champions about how to work differently, and that's what's making the difference.
I think it's very evident if you see the investment that's taken place in Broad Street already. You know, that's now a vibrant area which used to be desolate at times, and now it's really vibrant. And we've seen further investment recently, and I think we should encourage that, because people will want to be there.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I do indeed. Thank you, Chair. As you mentioned, Minister, we now have a high street where there are more empty shops compared to years previous. So what discussions have taken place between yourself and now your Assistant Minister, Connotab Crowcroft, to address that issue?
It's an ongoing topic of conversation, as Connotab pointed out as well. It's a kind of 3-way conversation as well, particularly around public realm. You know, I speak with officers. My officers are working very closely with Contab of St Helier as well. I have been concerned very much about Queen Street, particularly one side of Queen Street. But as you know, the indications are that I think we will be seeing change in the coming months there, which is really heartening to me, and I'm really pleased. But again, this is one of those areas where, you know, we do not have control in terms of they are not our buildings, so we cannot control tenancies and, you know, landlords, etc. But certainly in some of those areas, I'm really grateful to landlords for having let us, you know, dress up their windows, things like this. We've had stories about the RNLI, or we're going to have. We've had, you know, they've allowed us to kind of dress windows to at least create some animation in there. But it's, you know, it's a difficult period on that particular street. But I do think I'm beginning to get indications that there is light at the end of that tunnel.
And what do you think the main reasons are for shops becoming empty?
Well, I like to blame the UK on this one in terms of not the UK government, but you know, a lot of them are UK chains, and so it's their own change of circumstances. And I mean, certainly the one that I'm thinking of, the big one on Queen Street, it's not because that shop went into liquidation in the UK. They chose to move to a different part of town where they got a really vibrant store, and you know, that's just the general change and churn of business life. There's also a reality, which was decisions made decades ago by the states, meant that the kind of centre of gravity of town has moved to the south. And so we've obviously now got the waterfront area, which has become a lot more attractive from a retail perspective. It was mentioned then, I remember reading it in the papers, you know, you're moving the centre of town to the south, you're going to end up with less kind of retail activity in the northern part of Queen Street, etc. So what we're seeing is also the result of policy decisions that the states have made over time. I take it as an opportunity to make town larger in that respect, the retail area of town. We're also, in the last island plan, we shrunk the retail kind of exclusion, not as in excluding other things that other than retail, if you know what I mean. So now it really is just very tightly around the main King Street, Queen Street area that is kind of retail focused. But we're already seeking to loosen that, working with the Minister for Environment and Planning to see if we can change the general development order to make it easier for, you know, cafes or restaurants to open, or other types of store which aren't necessarily directly retail. You could have a boutique cinema, you know, things like this. They all add up to, as the Connotab was saying, a much more vibrant high street. That's the aim. So I definitely not a purist in the sense of King Street, Queen Street must be shops for retail only. I think that's
They've got to be
an idea that's had its time.
They'd have to be economically viable, though, wouldn't they? I mean, if you're paying a full retail rent to run a art house cinema, you might not get off the ground.
And I'm not suggesting that we necessarily will. I was just using it as an example of it doesn't have to be shops. It can be wider things. You're right. I'm not sure economically whether an art house cinema would work there.
I mean, what I am going to say,
it's not for me to decide. It's for business owners to decide.
If you hold your thought a moment, what I was going to ask is that it seems like there's a synergy. Is that one interesting area that you've got in your portfolio, I believe, and you've got a minister who's responsible for the market, and that so you're effectively landlord of the market. Is that correct? That's correct. It's and we don't see there's virtually no vacancy rates, I don't think, in the market. In terms of the stalls, that they seem to be well-established stalls.
Well, there are vacancies in the market.
Yeah, really? Many?
If you think of if you think particularly on the Berrister Street side of the market, there are some vacancies there.
Okay.
Like today, there was some, but I do know we have a lot of interest, and again, the Connotab might be closer to it, but we have a lot of interest, and I believe that we are going to see some new shops going into those, but just to be, I know that there are some empty stores on that side of the market.
Would you ever envisage your department taking over further units elsewhere that could offer a different approach to renting out space for certain types of ventures? So, for example, in Queen Street, is that a possibility that you might consider?
I wouldn't in the kind of wider high street or town environment in the market. That's something that I have said we can use the market to help shops get off the ground. You know, somebody with a new retail concept could start in the market where we're able to control the rents that help them get their foot on the ladder. That would be in the short term. With success, they can then move into the high street. I don't know from the markets if there's any.
I think there are examples of that happening where they outgrow their premise in the market and they find premises on the high street. So that's a good example. The Council of St Helier is leading on the markets. And they've just allocated, I think, 3 units new tenants. So, I think the fact that the market's now open on a Thursday afternoon, a couple of evenings a week, I think that's a step in the right direction. It's back to that experience, isn't it? If you look at the work that we've done jointly with the Paris St Helier in Halkett Street, I think Halkett Street is a fantastic example of what can be achieved. Yeah. It's terrific. I really think it's great. Yeah, and
in terms of the broader strategic sort of focus around retail, I mean, you're going to develop a new retail strategy, yes. When will we see that? When will that?
By the end of this year.
By the end of this year, okay. And
Was it 2025?
Well, the retail strategy.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got...
Sorry, it might be 2025, I apologise.
Zero draft ready at the end of this month, ready for final publication at the end of the year.
Thank you. Yeah. Suddenly had the fear I'd given incorrect information.
That's all right, okay. And in terms of the focus, how different is this strategy going to be to what's gone before? What are you trying to achieve through this?
So this is going to be much more focused on the high street itself. Previously, they've been slightly wider than that. But it is about trying to, it's going to be very much focused on attracting investment in order to create a vibrant high street, everything from the public realm side through to the actual shops, etc., that are on there and the businesses that serve islanders. We've all travelled abroad and been to really vibrant high streets and town centres, and whichever town you're thinking of when I say that, that's where I'd like St Helier to be. And my comments in the paper were, and I so often think this is, I see tourists in town on a Sunday afternoon, and it just, from a retail perspective, there isn't a great deal to do, but that is being changed by the kind of hospitality sector. We have more alfresco eating, we have more bars and cafes and restaurants open on the high street itself. So town, I would suggest now, is actually feeling a bit more vibrant on a Sunday afternoon than it was even a year ago. Yeah. I think that makes a big difference. So we're absolutely moving in the right direction, step by step.
Have you considered the impact of online shopping on your strategic design and strategic developments, and how are you mitigating that? It's
always there. There's no question online shopping has an impact, but it's, as I say, the fact that we have healthy footfall figures in St Helier shows you that it's also something which we can work with. It's not something we need to be fearful of. And obviously there are definitely stores in town, particularly Jersey-owned independent stores, where they operate online as well as through their bricks and mortar. And so I think that's something that's really important. When you run a small business, it's exhausting. It's constant work. And one of the things nowadays, if you're a small business kind of retailer, is that you probably very often have to have an online presence as well as the bricks and mortar presence.
So in terms of certainty, would you say, or are you saying, that the attraction through the retail strategy to big chains will actually give more certainty to the sustainability of the high street? Yeah, is there a danger that we would lose some of those independent businesses as a result of that?
I don't think so. I don't think we're in that space where Jersey's got a really interesting mix of independent and more well-known chains, principally from the UK, not all recognisable in the UK, but principally. I think the fact that I would always want to seek to have a good proportion of independent Jersey-owned businesses, because that's what, and again, think of your own tourist experiences. Yeah, that's what makes any town unique, is that feeling that it's not just a set of chains one after the other. But chains can play a really important role in attracting footfall as well, and tourists, etc. So it's always just a balance, but they complement each other.
Just very quickly, can I ask for what data are you citing around footfall in terms of saying that there's been it's healthy?
So I'm citing the data that comes from our footfall cameras, and the only reason I haven't given actual figures is because the data isn't owned by us; it's owned by the company that operates those cameras. But the data I have, basically, as we say, our new cameras, I'll tell you the note I've been given. Our new cameras are recording higher footfall numbers as they capture the entry and exit points at each end of the high street. But because they are new cameras...
Higher than what, though?
I'm going there. Because they are new cameras, which were only installed last year, we don't have information. We can't measure the new system against previous years. What we do know is 2023, we were back to 76.3% of the 2019 footfall. So far this year, we're up on 2023. So we're not back to, as I said,
Yeah.
we're not back to pre-COVID levels,
Right.
but we are back above 2022, and 2024 is looking like it's higher than 2023.
So it's higher than 2024, but we're not sure yet how it compares to pre-COVID.
Well, no, what we know is, the latest data we have for a full year is 2023. That is still basically 23.7% lower than pre-COVID, than 2019. But our data so far for each month this year puts us at higher than 2023. So we're on course, all else being equal and carrying on in the same direction. We're on
Footfall
course at
just records
2024 to be higher than.
Footfall just records who's in town.
That's correct.
It doesn't say what they're doing, whether they're shopping.
Right.
So they could be just going to work and going home.
That's
There
absolutely
could
right.
be more people in Jersey.
That's exactly right. It's really similar to the internet in the sense of you can see who's searching for your name on Google, but you don't know if they go and actually buy what you want or book your hotel. And so it's the same thing. Our job as a government is to provide a vibrant town centre that attracts people to the town centre. It's then on each individual shop, each individual cafe, restaurant, etc., to convert that footfall into their sale.
We just wanted to qualify that. Do you think that it will be possible to break down the footfall in terms of by time later on? So if we want to interrogate Sunday and also after 5 o'clock, for example, between 5 and 8, is that something you're likely to be able to do with the
It is
cameras?
the data is quite granular. I don't know if it goes to period of the day level of granularity. And because, like I say, it's not our data, we don't own it. I can't just
Who does own it?
throw it out there. It's a private, I believe it's a company in the UK that provides the cameras, does the analysis for us, and provides us with the information. We have a kind of set circulation of that information.
That's fine.
Purely for not wanting to break either commercial agreements or data protection laws.
We just want to be
definitely
aware
happy
of
to ask what can be given to you,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean. Sorry, Moss.
I was just saying that we've got this figure here.
Yes, but I just don't want to say that figure.
Oh,
That's the point.
I mean, at some point it would be useful to have meaningful. We can come back to this. It's just I wanted to understand that.
Yeah.
And Andrew, did you have a?
Oh yes, yeah. I just wanted to ask, Minister, before we reconstituted the States Assembly, the Treasury Minister brought forward a proposal for the implementation of GST on all Amazon sales.
Yes.
I was wondering what impact has that had on consumption?
I genuinely don't know.
I don't know. Okay. Yeah. No, just what I'd ask. Thank you. Okay.
Right, we're going to move. We've got some other areas of questioning. We may not get through all of them today, but you mentioned the Opera House, so let's talk about the Opera House, if that's okay. So the restoration budget for the Opera House increased from 11.7 million to 12.7 million, so that's £1 million. Can you provide an explanation of the factors that led to this budget increase, first of all?
There are a number of factors, not least the fact that there's a heritage building, but I'll ask Dan to come in there if that's right, Dan. Dan's been the officer at the front of this.
Effectively, the budget has grown as the project has become clear in terms of what has needed to be done. So it started off as a very modest sum, and now, as you say, totaling a budget of 12.76 million. This has included an initial sum for that Ashby requested as the main contractor for the project, which came in at 11.2 effectively. There are additional project costs outside of the main contractor works, and then there are insurance premiums of six-figure sums, which is effectively bringing that number to the 12.76, but we can give you a further, more detailed breakdown if that is required.
So there was presumably contingency already built into the original budget?
Yeah, based on inflation. So we had something like a 6% contingency built in at the writing of the business case. So yeah, the contingency has been built, and we haven't drawn on contingency beyond.
And the contingency you say was primarily for inflation?
Yeah.
Not for unenvisaged extra work?
It was inflation. It was for that, but it was based on an inflationary number. So that was the premise of what we might require. Okay. I think it's fair to say that at that stage we knew that a project of that sort of type, where you take down a wall and you don't know what you're going to find, whether you find asbestos or whatever, and we're finding that throughout the project that, you had to have a nominal figure for contingency, and that we decided that should be based on inflation.
If we ask for a breakdown of that £1 million, would you be able to provide?
Yeah, we've
that
got very
to us?
detailed. We've got very detailed costings, and we've got very detailed scope of works that we can share.
So I think it might be better to ask for that in a written form, if that's all right.
Yeah.
No, I
rather
would
than
suggest
go
that's
through a
right.
long list of.
If I could just add, from a quality assurance, as in project quality assurance perspective, the government's internal audit has done an audit of the Opera House project, and it's come out with very good findings.
So in terms of the ongoing maintenance, so once we've got this lovely new Opera House, which we've seen, and we were pleased to be able to go and have a look.
I'm pleased.
It's already looking good, so we're envisaging a grand opening. How do we make sure that it's maintained properly in the future so we don't get into this situation?
Well, that's work that we're doing with Jersey Property Holdings, so it actually does touch the Colin Harbour's portfolio as well. And, I've always said from the outset, we cannot end up being in the same position again. We have to make sure that money is set aside, and we will do so.
So what kind of figures
The precise way that will happen is yet to be defined, but it's work that is ongoing.
Is there a general approach in government? I mean, I'm happy if the Constable wants to come in here about depreciation of assets and setting aside money is a general problem, I think, not just for the Opera House. Is that
That's definitely the concept.
is there a government-wide strategy in this regards?
We are not sure if you saw the state of the estate report that we produced earlier this year, and by the end of this year we will have a more up-to-date programme. It's clear to say that we haven't invested significantly enough in our assets. We have to meet mandatory requirements, so fire legislation, Legionellas, all those kind of things. But we need to do more, and we need to invest more, and we need to make some tough decisions about which assets we retain and which assets we dispose of, in my opinion, so that we look after what we've got and make sure that we do a good fist of it. I think the important thing, when the building works are done at the Opera House, the majority of those works will be covered by a form of warranty. So we've got time to actually put in place a robust plan for that maintenance schedule. But it's outstanding, the work that's being done. It'll be an absolute showcase for the island, and we look forward to some great performances again on that stage.
Yeah. Could I ask, maybe bring the officers in, Minister, if you're happy with that, in terms of ask the question, what's a realistic kind of sum that we should be putting away for the ongoing maintenance of buildings like this? How do you envisage it might work?
One of the discussions I've had with the delivery senior responsible officer on the project, who's Tim Daniels, director of Jersey Property Holdings, I think firstly we've got to determine what type of lease we're talking about here. He's committed to produce a tiered sum of money that effectively goes into a pot that looks after the Opera House, because of course, as Constable has said at the beginning, because most of the work is under warranty, we won't have big costs associated with those items if they go wrong, because they're covered under warranty. So he's developing a set of recommendations around the level.
I'll give you a school as an example. The majority of schools have got caretakers. Caretakers are often deployed in driving minibuses around and perhaps not cleaning gutters, for example. And you need to clean your gutters if you maintain your property. So we're doing a lot of work with colleagues in various different departments as to what is going to be the responsibility of property holdings and what is going to be the responsibility of the tenant. Once we've got those agreed, property holdings will have to manage that in terms of ensuring the work that is supposed to be done by the tenant is actually carried out. So there's a huge amount of work going on in that area.
So cleaning a gutter is one thing, but rendering a front of a building might be something different.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the point about the type of lease. If you've got a fully repairing lease, if you're the owner of that property, you can be quite relaxed because the tenant is going to do all of the work. If you don't have that kind of a lease, then...
Is it reasonable to have, I mean, this problem's come up before, is it reasonable for entities that are essentially non-profit, should we say, to be expected to maintain a building if they're getting government grants in the first place?
Well, that's a good question. If you take a school, for example, they don't pay any rent to property holdings, but property holdings have got the responsibility of maintaining that asset. They do have a central fund where they deploy assets for some of the general maintenance. And that, I've not been involved in the discussions with the Opera House board, but that board of directors, which they are, will be responsible for ensuring that they meet the terms of the lease that they sign. Yeah.
I think, Chairman, on that point, I think, one of the things I've asked for from the Opera House is what their commercial development plan is. Obviously, we want to minimise the cost of the taxpayer running the Opera House, and they are a limited company in their own right. So I don't think they are a not-for-profit. I think we should be doubling down on making sure that the operator is commercial and therefore minimising the amount of funding that required from the public to run what is effectively an expensive asset now.
Yeah. Can I ask about whether it's anticipated that the ongoing maintenance of Opera House, is that expected to come out of, are you expecting them to pay for it out of their revenue grant, or is there an alternative source of funding to be considered?
No, I think kind of going back to Dan's point there, in this one that I've once said, the Opera House is a business. So Opera House Limited is a business, and it's up to them to be commercial in that respect. Now, as I believe you likely are think as well, the arts is not all about commerciality. Arts and culture is also about items of, putting on shows which won't make a profit. I don't want to put a burden on the Opera House to the extent that they feel they have to make a large profit out of every show that they put on. But equally, again, it comes back to their balance being struck. They will have to put on some commercial shows in order to make sure that they have an element of profitability in their work. That means, from my perspective, that, and this is where a lease negotiation comes in, the board of directors of the Opera House have to negotiate their lease of property holdings. They have to think about the level of income that they are going to have to be able to maintain some areas of that property. I'd actually say unlikely to be rendering the front of the Opera House. It's much more likely to be the internals and things like that, where wear and tear from the operations.
I get that.
Of the
What I'm saying is that is it reasonable to expect that money to come out of the revenue grant rather than a capital bid, for example?
It hasn't been decided yet, so I don't think it's difficult to say either way. But as I say, what I've always committed to is the idea that we have a mechanism for making sure that the Opera House as a building is not left in the state
I think Richard might want to come in.
I apologise, Richard. I couldn't see you.
No, I was just going to say, so we have the Opera House as a building. We've got the Opera House Board Limited, as the Minister has said. We've got to think about who is the right tenant for the building long term. So there's no guarantee that the Opera House Board is the right long-term tenant. We've had problems in the past. We've worked constructively through this phase of the redevelopment of the Opera House with a successful project to date. We've got to ensure that the tenants going forwards, as the Minister for Infrastructure said, are able to uphold those obligations, whatever they may be, whatever they're determined to be, and can run an appropriately viable programme that meets both financial, commercial and other social and cultural objectives.
Why don't you put that out to tender then?
I don't. We're a long way down the road, and I'd have expected most of these questions to have been answered before we started any work on that building, because we've agreed to invest.
But you've indicated in other areas you like things going out to tender, so there shouldn't be a presumption that we favour one entity over another. Maybe that's a question for the Minister.
I was going to say, regarding who is operating the Opera House, I have no plans to put out to tender at the moment. The current Jersey Opera House Limited is the company that we're working with as to be the tenants of the Opera House. They have a board, they have marketing going, program that they're developing. They're the people that we're starting. That's who we're starting with. But, the chief officer is absolutely correct that they need to factor all these things into their business plans. If for some unknown reason in the future it appears that they are unable to uphold their obligations to property holdings and so on and so forth, then it may be that there comes a time in the future we would have to look at the possibility of another tenant. It's really important that is not a plan, and that is not a piece of work at the moment.
So how does this square with the responsibilities for public realm? Because what you've got here is an asset that is considered as part of the public realm, but what Richard's just talked about is the fact that you're actually commercialising that piece of public realm and expecting the agent to actually pay for the upkeep of it. So I'm just trying to get some clarity as to how that works.
Yeah, so the point I was making was not dissimilar to the one that the Assistant Minister for Sport made around sports facilities, that there comes an element of provision that government makes, but you want the level of subsidy for that to be the lowest acceptable level for all the stakeholders. It's no different in running a social or a cultural venue. You want that level of subsidy to be at the lowest point that stakeholders are satisfied with. If it can turn a profit, great, and then that profit's reinvested back in the arts and cultural activities. But if you can minimise the amount of subsidy, that's also helpful. Venues up and down the UK will have different operating models. As I said, there's been success working through this renovation with the Opera House Board, but we're moving into a very different paradigm now with a new fit-for-purpose building that's got to be properly looked after, and all of the obligations upheld both on our side as government and the department and property holdings, but also whoever's occupying that as a tenant as well.
Yeah, I don't see it as a commercial relationship in as much as the government as the owner of that building trying to get the best return on that building. It's a big piece of real estate in the middle of town, so it could actually realise significant monies. What we need to do is make sure that whatever the lease arrangement is that the works are done. So whether they pay a slightly higher rent than we would envisage and we do more of the works, or they pay a low rent and they take on more of that responsibility. But I think the key thing is that we have a lease in place between the tenant and the government, and both parties are very aware of what they are responsible for.
Yeah.
And certainly the landlord needs to uphold what they're responsible for.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for
And
that
that's what I meant by
clarification.
the balance. It is a balance, and so I am not asking the Opera House to have profitability targets or anything like this. They can only put on very highly commercial elements. It is a community centre as much as it is a theatre, as much as it is a potential place for commercial activity as well. It has to play all of those roles. I am not asking for it to do any differently, but what we have to be aware of as government is it is not 100% grant funded. It doesn't need to be 100% grant funded. And as Rich much more eloquently put it than I do, is there is that minimum level of government provision to ensure that the community and the non-profitable side of it takes place. But then the Opera House has its ability to make money as well. It is a business. It can make some money, and that can help with the maintenance. And so again, it's not 100% of the maintenance will be on the Opera House, but it's unlikely that 100% of the maintenance will be on property holdings.
Sure.
But we will make sure at our side that Jersey Property Holdings and the Opera House have sufficient funds to maintain that building going forward.
To a standard.
Can I ask, hopefully it's not too much of an unexpected question, but does government need to own the Opera House?
Government doesn't need to own any property.
Property Holdings is looking to divest of some of its portfolio. Is the Opera House, would it make sense to do it now once it's a new building in peak condition to offer it for sale to the private sector?
Well, I don't. I think it's a key asset for the island. It's a very big part of our heritage. Whether it stayed in the property holdings portfolio or went to somebody like Jersey Heritage, there could be private investors.
It's good that there's still appetite for state involvement in commercial environments. It's good to know. We are at time really, so whilst we'd be happy to keep going.
We asked Deputy Scott a question. I feel like she's been here on her own. She's played the sub today.
No, it's fine.
Scott, yeah, I mean,
I'm not even sure I've got anything within my dedication anyway.
I mean, tell us what are the particular areas that you've been involved with in the department, and in the absence of any
Formally,
clear
I'm delegated a role under data protection, the electronic communications law and telecommunications law. That's kind of expand a bit into the cyber defence area, and also, although the Minister's retained an interest in the telecommunications security framework as well, which is being developed under the telecoms law, and the scrutiny panel will be seeing legislation in respect of the cybersecurity law and regulations in respect of the telecom security framework, hopefully both being lodged in September. So
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Doing some super work.
We do have questions on the cyber which are on our paper, but if I'm mindful of the time, so if you're all happy to, that we can follow up with written responses and you can provide those written responses, I think we'd be happy with that as well. And we'll make sure that we put you first on the agenda of the next thing. That seems to be the way it's working out.
Total football.
Yeah. Any?
No, not from me.
We did say it's difficult for women to access sport equally, so you'll be on the starting
Or
line
access
next time.
talk.
Yeah. Indeed. Good. Well, can I thank you finally again for coming along? We appreciate your time twice in one day, Minister, and for some of you. We look forward to keeping on scrutinising you in the next